I'm Commander Clara Finn, 34, and I worked my way up through the ranks with zero shortcuts. For years, I bent over backwards for my fiancé, followed his postings, turned down promotions, backed his every move. But when he left me at the altar and called me weak in front of both our families, I made a decision that changed everything. Ever been betrayed by the one person you thought had your back? If you have, drop your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before we dive in, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to rebuild after someone tried to break you, hit like and subscribe. Because what happened next, you wouldn't believe it. I was raised on routine and respect. My grandfather served in Korea, my father in Desert Storm. The dinner table wasn't just for eating, it was for updates, orders, debriefs. Chores were done without being asked. Emotions stayed in check. If you were upset, you handled it quietly and didn't let it affect your performance. My parents never used the word discipline, but it was implied in everything. Structure wasn't a burden, it was safety. By the time I was in high school, I already knew I'd follow the same path. I wasn't chasing anyone's approval. I just wanted to earn my place the same way they had. No shortcuts. No favoritism. I enlisted right after undergrad and started officer candidate school within the year. I didn't look back. That's where I met Jake. He stood out in a way that didn't require effort. People naturally turned to him. His confidence wasn't loud. It was just there, settled, like he'd already proven himself in a room we hadn't walked into yet. He was good at the physical training, good at the academics, and better at reading people than most of the instructors. The kind of guy who asked smart questions, made sharp observations, and still managed to laugh at the right moments. We weren't instantly close. I didn't gravitate toward charm. I trusted consistency more than charisma. But over time, he became part of my routine. Study partners. Then training partners. Then more. He had this way of showing up right when you needed someone to. Like during a navigation exercise when my team went off-grid and lost radio contact. He found us an hour later, handed me a canteen, and said, "Don't worry. I covered for you." He smiled like it was no big deal. We didn't have some whirlwind romance. There were no dramatic declarations or late-night confessions. We just started spending more time together. Conversations got longer. Our workouts turned into planning sessions. He shared his career goals with me in a way that sounded more like strategy than dream. I respected that. When we got stationed together the first time, everything fell into place. Shared apartment, shared fridge calendar, shared PT schedule. He'd leave early to get ahead on reports. I'd stay up to iron uniforms or handle logistics. It wasn't transactional, we had rhythm. Looking back, I can see where the cracks started. But at the time, it felt like compromise. A few months in, I deferred a training rotation that would have taken me to Fort Huachuca for 6 weeks. Jake had just been put on a fast-track path, and the idea of long distance made him tense. He never said don't go, but he said things like, "It's bad timing and I need you here." So I stayed. Then came the late-night study sessions for his exams. I'd just finished a 14-hour shift, but he needed a quiet space and someone to run drills. So I did. I didn't mind. I was used to working past the point of comfort. If you want something to work, you give it what it needs. He'd say thank you, but in that vague, casual way. Like he assumed I knew. And I did at first. My parents met him a year later. My dad was reserved but respectful. My mom adored him immediately. "He's sharp," she said, "but he listens." You need that. They saw him the way I wanted to believe he was. Capable. Loyal. Ambitious but grounded. When he proposed, it wasn't elaborate. No audience, no speech. Just us in the kitchen after dinner. He opened the drawer where the utensils were, pulled out a small box, and said, "We already function like a team. Let's make it official." It wasn't romantic, but it felt like him. Clean. Clear. Straightforward. I didn't hesitate. I said yes. I remember thinking how rare it was to find someone who understood the demands of our work and still wanted to build a life together. A life that didn't fight against the structure, but fit into it. What I didn't see, or didn't want to see, was how the balance kept shifting. When he got offered a leadership course in Virginia, I rescheduled my own coursework to stay close. When I got tapped for a joint command training in DC, he asked if I could delay it by a quarter. "There's a lot going on," he said. "I need you here right now." It wasn't a demand. He didn't have to raise his voice. He'd just look at me like I was the only thing keeping his plan intact. And that always worked. We moved again 2 years later, this time to Colorado. I qualified for an early promotion but didn't put in for it. It would have meant reporting to a new unit ahead of him, and I didn't want to disrupt our alignment. He never asked me not to apply. He just said, "I don't know what I'd do without you here." So I stayed. Again. At the time, I told myself it was what any partner would do. Support where needed. Make sacrifices for the bigger picture. Except we weren't building something together anymore. I was holding everything up. He'd started talking differently around his friends, mostly civilian types, some tech guys from his brother's side. They'd make these jokes about women who run their households like deployments, or micromanage relationships. He'd laugh a little too long. And then he started referring to me as intense. First in private, then in front of others. "She's got a system for everything," he'd say, like it was funny. I started noticing how he'd shift when I talked about career goals. How his tone changed when I got recognition for something he didn't. The word team stopped coming up. Still, I adjusted. I stayed. I took on more. I told myself he was under pressure. That once things settled, he'd recalibrate. That this version of him wasn't the whole story. We set the wedding date during a weekend off. He picked the venue. I organized everything else. Seating chart, logistics, family travel, schedule. He nodded through most of it. Said I was handling things like a real CO. I thought it was a compliment. We had a few arguments in the last few months leading up to the wedding. Nothing explosive, just friction. He started making comments about me being too rigid or all structure, no softness. I asked what that meant. He said, "You're just always in uniform, even when you're not." It stung, but I didn't push. I figured he was overwhelmed. So I kept the plans moving. I kept the routine steady. He was the one I wanted to build with. And I still believed, naively, that when the day came, all the doubts would dissolve. That we'd stand there, shoulder to shoulder, and everything would click back into place. I didn't know I was already standing alone. A few months out from the wedding, things started to shift. Subtle at first. A change in tone, a shift in pace. Nothing I could have pointed to on paper, but I felt it in the way he responded to me, like something fundamental had gone off course, and he either didn't notice or didn't care to fix it. It started with how he spoke about my work. Before, he used to brag about it. Told people I was disciplined as hell and smarter than half the base. But around February, when I got offered a spot in a selective leadership rotation, his reaction was off. He didn't say congratulations. He just blinked and said, "Huh, that's early, isn't it?" I told him yes, it was ahead of the usual timeline. He didn't ask how I got in. He asked who made the selection. I tried brushing it off. Told myself he was just surprised. Maybe even a little worried about how the timing would affect our wedding plans. I gave him the benefit of the doubt because that's what you do when you've spent years trusting someone. You round up. You forgive what you think is temporary. Then came the comments. "You're cute when you go full regulation," he said once after I corrected a protocol slip on a planning doc. I laughed at the time. Thought it was nothing. But he kept doing it. Every time I held a line or pointed out a misstep, it became a joke. "You love a good checklist, don't you? Or you really can't turn it off, huh?" He'd say it like he was teasing, like we were still on the same team. But it didn't feel like that. It felt like he was playing to an audience I wasn't part of. That's when his circle started changing. He'd always had a mix of military friends, steady guys, grounded. But now he was spending more time with people from outside the service. Civilians mostly. Tech startup types, guys who talked fast and loud and loved words like disruption and optimization. They threw casual get-togethers in apartments with no furniture but 3 flat screens, where the liquor was expensive and the conversations were cheap. I went a few times. Tried to be open. Tried to listen. But I couldn't relate. They talked about women like accessories. About relationships like investments. At one of the dinners, one of them, Jason, I think, said, "You know what I like? A woman who just supports, no drama, no ego." Someone who lets you be the main character. Jake didn't say anything. Didn't push back. Didn't laugh. Just sipped his drink and nodded like he understood. Afterward, in the car, I brought it up. Asked if that was the kind of conversation he was okay with now. He said, "You don't always have to be on alert. They're just talking. Don't make it a thing." That was the first time I felt something lock up in my chest. It wasn't about the comment. It was about the silence. The way he didn't defend me or women like me, because it didn't serve him to do it. He started spending more nights out with them. Always just grabbing a drink or talking business. He said they had ideas. Said maybe he'd explore some options outside the military. There's more money in tech, he told me once. More flexibility. Fewer rules. I asked if he was serious. He shrugged. Just thinking out loud. I started feeling like a side project. Like a checklist item he'd already completed. There was no more planning, no more shared goals. Just him chasing something I didn't recognize, while I stayed exactly where I'd always been, focused, committed, steady. In meetings, he started interrupting me. If we were with friends or even colleagues, he'd correct small details I hadn't finished explaining yet. She means, or what she's trying to say, like I hadn't said it clearly enough the first time. Sometimes he'd cut me off entirely. Once, while I was mid-sentence talking about a training protocol change, he laughed and said, "She's still figuring it out." I didn't laugh. No one else did either. That night I asked him about it. He looked genuinely confused. "What are you talking about?" I said, "You undercut me. You made me sound incompetent." He said, "You're being too sensitive." It was a joke. It wasn't a joke. I told myself it was stress. That maybe he was trying to impress his new friends or establish himself in some way I didn't understand. I told myself we just needed time to recalibrate. We were under pressure. Everyone said the months before a wedding were tough. But then there was the issue with the family visit. My parents flew in one weekend to help with logistics. His parents joined too. It was meant to be a cooperative effort, finalizing the guest list, picking up last-minute supplies. We had dinner that Saturday at our place. It was a normal night until his father asked about our plans after the wedding. Before I could answer, Jake jumped in. "Well, we'll see," he said. "Depends on which of us gets deployed first." I said, "That's not what we discussed." He kept smiling. "I mean, we don't know. Things change." I looked at him. That wasn't the plan. We had agreed, whoever got the longer assignment first, the other would follow. We'd even drafted an appeal letter in case we needed to shift timelines. His mother noticed the tension. Changed the subject. That night, I asked why he changed the story. He said, "Because I'm not sure anymore. I'm not sure we should be building everything around your job." That was the first time I couldn't respond. I just stood there, trying to figure out when we stopped being aligned. When it became your job instead of our plan. After that, the energy between us changed. He stopped offering help with anything wedding-related. He still showed up for what was required, tastings, a few calls, but he didn't ask questions. Didn't contribute. Didn't seem interested in any of it. He was detached, and I kept trying to close the gap. I thought maybe he just needed reassurance. That maybe if I handled things calmly, without confrontation, he'd come back around. But he wasn't drifting. He was distancing. And I let him. Because by then, I'd convinced myself it was just a phase. That he was overwhelmed or scared or confused. And maybe he was. But I also think he was already making his exit. Just waiting for the right moment. And still I stayed. I planned. I led. Because I believed in who we were. Or at least, who we used to be. I didn't know I was the only one left believing. The ceremony was scheduled for 1400. I arrived early, as I always do, uniform pressed, every detail accounted for. The venue was simple, clean lines, white walls, a few muted arrangements of greenery that my mother had picked out herself. It wasn't extravagant, but it was intentional. Everything about the day had been organized, thought through, confirmed and reconfirmed. There were no unknowns. That's what I told myself. My dress blues felt sharp that day. Familiar. Like armor. My mother had quietly pushed for a gown, something softer, but I stuck with what I knew. I wasn't trying to make a point. I just wanted to feel grounded. The guests began arriving by 13:30. His family came in first, polite, composed, all small smiles and steady hands. My parents followed soon after. My father wore his best suit, the same one he wore to my commissioning ceremony. My mother was checking the order of service even though she already had it memorized. Everyone knew where to sit, what to expect, how it would go. On paper, it was a perfect event. Jake was supposed to arrive with his best man around 13:45. By 13:52, there was still no sign of him. I assumed traffic. Or a delay in getting dressed. It didn't register as anything more than a timing issue. I'd built the entire day with buffers. At 13:58, the officiant gave me a subtle nod. The prelude music was starting. I stepped into position near the front of the room, waiting behind the partition for the signal to walk in. I remember adjusting the edge of my sleeve, feeling the tightness at the shoulder seam. It was warm, but I wasn't sweating. I was ready. The doors opened. I stepped forward. The room stood. He was already there. He wasn't supposed to be. He had skipped the walk-in, skipped the waiting, skipped the process entirely. He was standing near the center aisle, not smiling, not nervous. Just waiting for me. I walked the rest of the way, unsure of what I was stepping into. He didn't offer his arm. Just looked at me. When I reached him, he took my hands, tightly, and leaned in. His expression didn't match the moment. And then he said it. "You're not the woman I want anymore." My first thought was that I misheard. That the words were out of order or taken out of context. He didn't stop. "You're too rigid. Too intense." Pause. Weak. Then he let go, turned around, and walked out. No explanation. No warning. Just left. In front of everyone, my family, his family, our commanding officers, friends, the officiant still standing there with the book open. It didn't feel like a moment. It felt like a glitch. Like the room had stalled and I was the only person still moving in it. He didn't look back. There were no gasps, no cries. Just silence. And then, a minute later, the side door opened. His best man walked out, not alone. A woman followed him. She wasn't dressed for a wedding. No gown, no heels. Just a simple, pale dress, something you'd wear to a brunch. Her hair was pulled back in a way that felt too casual for the room she had just stepped into. They didn't make an announcement. They didn't stop walking. They moved down the side aisle and exited through the same doors he had just walked through. I didn't say anything. I didn't move. I just stood there. Someone coughed. A chair creaked. I could feel the weight of every person in the room watching me, waiting for something, tears, a reaction, an explanation. I didn't give them one. I turned around and walked back the way I came. Step by step. Even pace. No flinch. Tessa met me in the side room. She was already trying to unzip the back of my uniform, but I shook my head. I wasn't ready to move yet. She didn't ask questions. Just stood with me while I sat in the nearest chair and took off my gloves. 15 minutes later, my father opened the door halfway. "You don't have to face anyone," he said. "We can leave however you want." I nodded once. There was no dramatic exit. We used the back door. My mother handled the guests. Told them there'd be no reception. Apologized quietly. She didn't cry. Neither did I. I went home and took off the uniform piece by piece. I hung it up like I always did, methodically, without expression. The next day, I filed a request for reassignment. He never called. Never messaged. No apology. No explanation. Someone told me later that he had submitted a leave request 2 days before the wedding. Said it was for personal matters. He must have known even then. He let me go through every detail of that day knowing he'd never show up for it. The flowers were already paid for. So was the catering. The cake was delivered to an empty reception hall. My mother said they donated most of the food. No one asked for reimbursement. I boxed up the decorations and sent them to the event coordinator's office. I didn't want them in the apartment. His mother sent a bouquet 3 days later. No card. Just lilies. I didn't reply. At some point, someone sent me a screenshot of him with the woman. They were in a different city. Different life. Already smiling like none of it had happened. I deleted it. The only person who acknowledged it without flinching was my CO. He said, "You have leave on the books. Take it. Then come back stronger." That was the only thing I needed to hear. Everyone else tried to guess what happened. People love to fill silence with stories that make them comfortable. But there was nothing comfortable about it. There was no build-up, no fight, no last-minute plea. Just a whisper and a walkout. I kept thinking about that one word, weak. He didn't call me unkind. Or cold. Or wrong. He called me weak. I don't think he meant physically. I think he meant I wasn't soft in the way he wanted. That I didn't bend the right way. That I wasn't quiet enough anymore. That I had grown into something he couldn't control, and instead of adjusting, he left. I didn't fall apart. I went back to work. I followed the chain of command. Put in for every assignment that no one wanted. Took the deployments that had the lowest volunteer rates. I didn't do it out of vengeance. I did it because I needed to rebuild without distractions. He never reached out. I never chased an explanation. Because the truth was, I didn't want to understand what kind of man could do something like that. And I didn't want to become the kind of woman who needed closure from someone like him. I took leave the morning after the wedding. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't walk into the office and make a speech or request emergency status. I just submitted the paperwork the right way, handed it to admin, and left before anyone had time to say much. There were already rumors going around, of course there were, but no one said anything to my face. Military culture has a way of folding silence into formality. If they don't know what to say, they don't say anything at all. I didn't leave because I was falling apart. I left because I needed the noise to stop. I needed space to hear my own thoughts without interference. No family dinners. No follow-up texts. No polite offers to listen. Just a clean schedule and a closed door. I went back to my parents' house for the first few days. My mother hovered, but not aggressively. She folded laundry that didn't need folding and checked in on me like I was a patient recovering from surgery. At one point she said, "You dodged a bullet," like that was supposed to comfort me. But I didn't feel lucky. I didn't feel anything, really. My father said even less. He wasn't cold, just steady. He didn't ask what happened, and I didn't offer. The one time he acknowledged it directly, he said, "You'll come out of this sharper. You always do." It wasn't a compliment. It was a fact. That's how he saw things. A few days in, my CO called. He didn't lead with sympathy. He didn't ask about the wedding. He just said, "Don't let this stall you." I said I wouldn't. But the truth was, it had already stalled me. I wasn't falling apart. But I wasn't moving forward either. I was stuck in the replay loop, hearing that word over and over again. Weak. It didn't come out of nowhere. He'd been laying the groundwork for months. Undermining my choices. Dismissing my structure. Painting my discipline like it was some kind of limitation. But hearing it that directly, in that moment, with that kind of finality, it rewired something. I kept going back through every decision I'd made for us. Every time I adjusted, deferred, stepped back. Every time I prioritized his schedule over mine, his progress over mine. And it wasn't just love. It wasn't just partnership. I had convinced myself that giving ground was the same as building together. But it wasn't. I wasn't weak. I was compliant. I was loyal to a version of us that only I was protecting. And over time, I had made myself smaller so he could feel like more. Once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. It wasn't just that he walked away. It was that I had let the balance tip so far in his favor that when he left, he didn't even stumble. He just walked out clean. That realization didn't come all at once. It happened in layers. While running errands. While cooking dinner. While folding laundry next to my mother who still hadn't said the word left. Every mundane task gave me space to look at the pattern I had been too close to see. I kept thinking about all the times he'd looked at me with that subtle sense of disappointment. Like my competence was a flaw he was trying to gently sand down. Like my strength needed to be tempered for the sake of his comfort. And I let him. I really let him. I didn't blame myself for his choices. But I had to take responsibility for the permissions I gave him. For the things I tolerated in silence because I thought I was being supportive. For the way I bent myself around his expectations until I didn't recognize my own shape anymore. People asked if I wanted to talk about it. I didn't. Not because I was avoiding it, but because I was done giving it oxygen. There was no version of that story that would make me feel better. There was no insight I needed from him. The lesson wasn't in what he did. It was in what I allowed. A week into leave, I went through our old documents, shared bills, planning notes, drafts of the seating chart. I deleted every file. I cleared the calendar. I threw out the few things of his that were still in my apartment. There wasn't much. He traveled light when it came to actual responsibility. I didn't cry through any of it. I didn't play sad music or scroll through photos. I didn't feel heartbreak. I felt clarity. There was no grand declaration. No plan for revenge. I didn't need to rebuild faster, louder, or harder just to prove something. That would have still made him the center of the story. And I was done giving him that role. I came back to work 2 weeks later. Quietly. No announcement. I walked into the office, checked my inbox, and started scheduling myself back onto the board. The admin staff acted like nothing had happened, which I appreciated. My CO gave me a subtle nod when I passed his office. That was enough. I didn't tell anyone what I decided, but it showed up in how I moved. I stopped negotiating with people who didn't value my time. I stopped softening my voice just to keep a room comfortable. I stopped second-guessing my instincts just because someone else didn't share them. And I started putting in for every assignment that looked like it would stretch me. No more holding back for alignment. No more waiting to see if someone else was coming with me. I didn't rise out of anger. I rose out of habit. Out of discipline. Out of the same structure he had tried to call weakness. The next promotion cycle came quickly. I was recommended without hesitation. When people asked what changed, I just said, I stopped asking for permission. Because I did. That was the shift. Not a transformation. Not a new version of me. Just the same person, minus the weight of someone else's insecurity. I didn't need to prove him wrong. I just needed to stop proving myself to him. The decision wasn't dramatic. It didn't come in the middle of the night or after some emotional breakthrough. It came one morning while I was reading the announcement for the next round of leadership placements. There was an opening in a program I deferred once before, back when he said it wasn't the right time. I remember sitting with that for a few seconds. Then I submitted the application. No speech. No second guessing. I just did it. The acceptance came quickly. I was slotted into the rotation and told to prepare for relocation within the month. I didn't tell anyone outside of the chain of command until the orders were finalized. No reason to. The people who needed to know would find out when they saw the assignment list. The program was high intensity. 6 months of long days, night evaluations, and peer reviews that left no room for coasting. It suited me. I didn't have anything to prove, but I had everything to gain. I worked hard, stayed quiet, kept my circle small. Most people assumed I had always been like that. They didn't know I'd spent years making room for someone else. Now that the room was mine, I wasn't going to waste it. I started volunteering for deployments that others passed on. High turnover, short notice, difficult conditions. Not because I was trying to earn points, but because I knew what I was capable of and didn't see a reason to hide it anymore. When they asked for volunteers, I raised my hand. When they asked if I could lead a mixed-unit initiative overseas, I said yes before the sentence was finished. My name started showing up in places it hadn't before. Briefings. Recommendation lists. Promotion shortlists. People started to notice. Some warned me to pace myself. "You're running hot," one colleague said. "Don't burn yourself out." I nodded politely. But I wasn't running. I was building. Every choice was deliberate. Every post, every task, every rotation, I took it with purpose. Nothing was random. Nothing was reactive. Word got back to me that Jake had left active duty. Quietly. No big announcement. No retirement ceremony. Just gone. Transferred to civilian consulting, something vaguely adjacent to defense contracts, but without any of the regulation. A few months later, someone mentioned he'd gotten married. To her. The one from the wedding. I didn't ask for details, but I heard enough to fill in the gaps. She came from money. Old money, from what I was told. Her father owned a logistics firm that had contracts across several bases. It made sense. He traded in the life he used to have for a version with less pressure and more comfort. Fewer expectations. More affirmation. It didn't sting. Not exactly. It just confirmed what I already knew. He hadn't left because I was too much. He left because I couldn't be molded into something smaller. She didn't need him to be more. I had. He tried reaching out once. Just one message. Short. Civil, hope you're doing okay. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. No questions I needed answered. No part of me curious about his version of events. I archived the message and got back to work. Some people thought I was avoiding closure. But it wasn't avoidance. It was boundaries. I didn't need him to acknowledge the damage. I had already rebuilt what he broke. And I wasn't going to let him back in just so he could take credit for recognizing it too late. The truth was, the more distance I had, the more clearly I saw the pattern. He was never looking for a partner. He was looking for a mirror, someone who would reflect what he needed to see. When I stopped doing that, he replaced the mirror. Simple. And I stopped taking it personally. I used to think strength meant holding everything together, absorbing the friction, smoothing over the edges. But real strength is quiet. It doesn't advertise. It doesn't chase. It just endures. I focused on the work. That year, I led 3 back-to-back rotations. 2 international, 1 domestic. I trained new officers, mediated inter-unit conflicts, ran logistics in regions where everything was behind schedule and understaffed. I slept little, spoke less, delivered consistently. There were nights I sat alone in bunk rooms or temporary housing and just breathed. Not in sadness. In relief. The life I was living wasn't contingent on anyone's approval anymore. There was no one waiting for me to bend. No one quietly weighing my ambition against their ego. Just me and the mission and the people I was responsible for. Every promotion felt earned. Not just because I met the metrics, but because I finally met myself on the terms I'd avoided for years. No negotiation. No dilution. Just full accountability. And it showed. Superiors started requesting me by name. I was moved onto planning boards. Asked to consult on projects I used to read about from the sidelines. My record wasn't spotless, but it was solid. My file didn't need asterisks or footnotes. I had put in the time. I had taken the hits. And I kept moving. It wasn't personal anymore. Not against him. Not against anyone. It was procedural. That was the difference. There's a kind of power in making decisions that have nothing to do with proving someone wrong. In building a future that isn't a response to your past, but a reflection of your capacity. I didn't talk about what happened. Not because I was hiding it, but because it stopped being relevant. The people I worked with knew me as I was, direct, dependable, unshaken. That was enough. The consequences of my choices weren't burnout. They were transformation. I didn't flame out. I sharpened. And I didn't do it for closure. Or validation. Or redemption. I did it because I finally understood what I was capable of when I stopped waiting for permission. The first promotion came a year after I stopped waiting for one. It wasn't flashy, just a call to the CO's office and a formal notice. No ceremony, no surprise. I was already doing the work. They were just catching up. From there, things picked up. I started getting looped into more advanced planning cycles. Not just executing briefs, but shaping them. People I used to defer to started seeking out my opinion, passing me the lead during multi-unit exercises. It wasn't overnight, but the pattern held. I kept showing up, kept delivering. The title changes came slowly at first, then in clusters. It stopped being a question of if I was capable. It was just understood. With each new post, I took on more complexity. Joint task deployments. Interbranch coordination. High-pressure logistics where one delay could compromise the entire mission. I didn't flinch. I liked the challenge. It required full presence, no margin for pretense. By the 6th year, I was briefing rooms I used to sit silently in. Officers who once nodded politely now took notes when I spoke. There was a shift in the way people addressed me, less casual, more careful. Not out of fear. Out of respect. I was still young, relatively speaking. Younger than most at my level. But I carried myself like I'd already been there for a decade. Because in a way I had. The years I spent contorting myself into someone else's frame, those weren't wasted. They taught me where the pressure points were, what real leadership didn't look like. By the 7th year, I was tapped for command of a joint unit, cross-branch, high-function, high-turnover. The kind of assignment that didn't go to someone unless their record was spotless. Mine wasn't perfect, but it was unshakable. Every line in that file was earned. The morning of deployment was quiet. I got up early, reviewed the manifest, went over the briefing one last time. Standard prep. No drama. The unit had been assembled over the previous 2 weeks. Some I'd worked with before, some new. The final group had just flown in the night before. They were lined up for morning orders, full gear, fresh fatigues, standing at attention like every unit I'd addressed before. I walked out just before 0700. The sun was still low, casting long shadows across the tarmac. I had my notes in hand, but I didn't need them. I knew what I was going to say. Then I saw him. Front row, third from the left. Uniform crisp. Boots polished. Posture stiff, but not in a confident way. In a trying not to draw attention way. It was Jake. 7 years, and there he was. Back in uniform. I didn't flinch. He looked right at me. Eyes locked for half a second too long. Then he looked down. Pale. Still. I kept walking. I stepped into position, nodded to the adjutant, and gave the briefing. Clear, direct, procedural. Objectives, structure, rotation schedule. I spoke like I always do. Calm. Neutral. Command without excess. I didn't skip a beat. I didn't acknowledge him. Not even a flicker. When it was over, I dismissed the unit and returned to my quarters. It wasn't until later that I confirmed what I'd suspected. He had re-enlisted during the downturn. Civilian work wasn't as stable as he thought. Defense contracts got slashed. The cushy title he'd leveraged fizzled when the funding dried up. He came back because he had nowhere else to go. I read his personnel file. Not in a vindictive way, just as part of my standard review. He'd done the minimum since returning. Competent but quiet. No disciplinary flags, but no leadership marks either. He was there to stay afloat, not to grow. And now he was under my command. It didn't feel satisfying. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt inevitable. This is what happens when you build slowly, intentionally. When you stop trying to win and start trying to endure. I didn't treat him differently. I didn't speak to him directly unless it was required. No special treatment. No private conversations. Just one more name in the roster. He never made trouble. Never tried to explain. Never tried to reconnect. If he recognized what had shifted between us, he never said so. But I saw it in how he stood during briefings. How he avoided eye contact. How he deferred even when it wasn't necessary. He knew. And that was enough. I wasn't there to make a point. I was there to lead a unit. And that's what I did. There's a strange kind of power in outgrowing someone so completely that you no longer need anything from them, not closure, not acknowledgement, not even their absence. I didn't plan to cross paths with him again. The world just arranged itself that way. And when it did, I didn't look back. I just did my job. The same way I always had. Consistently. Quietly. Unshaken. He asked once. It was after a unit rotation, mid-cycle, when the tempo had slowed just enough to catch your breath. The request came through the proper channel. Nothing personal. Just a note routed through our team lead. If possible, Sergeant Jake Hughes would like a moment of the commander's time. Privately. It wasn't urgent. There was no pretext. Just that one line. I read it. Marked it as acknowledged. And didn't reply. He didn't follow up. He didn't corner me or try to make it awkward. He just backed off. Quietly. Respectfully. The way someone does when they know they've forfeited the right to access you. That was the only time he asked. And honestly, I appreciated the restraint. We haven't spoken since. Not in any meaningful way. We've crossed paths in briefings, operations, rotations. When necessary, he responds to orders clearly, follows instructions without delay. There's no attitude, no resistance. Just quiet compliance. Not in a defeated way. More like someone who knows how to function but no longer expects to be seen. He's present, but unremarkable. Just another uniform in a room full of them. I've heard people talk about forgiveness like it's a final destination. Like the only way to really move forward is to find that moment, face to face, heart to heart, where both people name the damage and release each other from it. But I don't believe that's always required. Some debts don't get reconciled. Some don't need to. What he took from me wasn't something he could give back. And what I gained in the years after had nothing to do with him. I don't hate him. There's no static when I see him. No tension. I don't brace myself or adjust my posture. He's just there. Like a page I already turned. If anything, I'm grateful. Not for what he did, but for what it revealed. His betrayal clarified everything. Not just about him, but about myself. About the ways I had overextended, overexplained, overcorrected to make space for a version of love that depended on me being smaller. When he walked out, he didn't just leave me. He left the illusion I had been trying to protect. And in the silence that followed, I rebuilt something real. So no, I didn't take that meeting. Not because I'm angry. Because there's nothing I need to hear. I know what happened. He made a choice. I responded to it. And the consequences unfolded the way they were always going to. People sometimes ask if I'd speak to him now, if, after all this time, I'd sit across from him, listen, maybe even forgive. But the truth is, I already have what I need. Forgiveness, if it came, wouldn't be for him. It would be for me. And I've already moved on. I don't avoid him. I just don't include him. There's a difference. He's not a threat. He's not a shadow. He's just someone I used to know, someone who left in the middle of a sentence and assumed I'd still be standing there when he came back. I wasn't. I was already miles ahead. He keeps his distance now. Doesn't overstep. Doesn't linger after briefings. If we lock eyes, it's brief, accidental. He always looks away first. I think he understands that whatever trust once existed is gone. Not in a dramatic, scorched earth way. Just cleared. Like a system reset. There's no residual. No unresolved tension. He operates within the lines. Shows up, does the job, leaves. No disruption. And that's fine. I don't need a resolution. I don't need his apology. And if he ever gives one, it won't change anything. Because I've already rebuilt the version of myself that doesn't depend on anyone else's recognition to be valid. There are moments when I catch him looking, quick glances during drills, briefings, group formations. Not intrusive. Just searching, maybe. Like he's trying to see where I went. The version he knew doesn't exist anymore. And I think he knows that. The silence between us isn't tense. It's clean. He's part of a history that no longer informs my direction. Just a name on a roster. Just a uniform information. The one private request was enough. It said everything. He wanted a moment. I didn't give it. Because he already had his moment. And he chose to leave. I never wanted revenge. That was never the fuel. I wanted space. I wanted time. I wanted purpose that didn't revolve around what had been taken from me. And I got all three. I didn't plot anything. I didn't chase rank for the optics. I didn't sit in rooms thinking about what I would say to him if I ever got the chance. That's not how it works. Real growth isn't cinematic. It's slow, unflashy. It's built in the dark, in long hours and hard conversations and honest decisions that no one claps for. I built my career without shortcuts. Every assignment logged. Every evaluation earned. Every recommendation letter the result of consistent, visible work. There's no story behind my record that anyone whispers about. No footnotes. Just proof. People sometimes ask what motivated me. As if there had to be some dramatic driver behind all of it. But the truth is, I stopped needing motivation when I got disciplined. When I understood the value of moving forward without needing to be seen doing it. I didn't aim to outrank him. That was never the goal. But I did. Not because I was chasing him. Because I stopped chasing anyone. I made peace with solitude. I built alliances with people who didn't need me to shrink. I learned how to lead without over-explaining, how to delegate without micromanaging, how to trust without handing over pieces of myself. And I stopped apologizing for being exacting. If I had softened after what he did, if I had internalized that word, weak, and adjusted to prove it wrong, I think I would have broken something in myself permanently. But I didn't soften. I sharpened. I became the kind of leader I never had. One who listens without coddling, holds standards without condescension, and makes room without compromising the mission. I don't need to raise my voice to be taken seriously. I don't need to defend my authority to people who know what it costs to earn it. There are officers under my command who know me only as commander. Not as someone's ex. Not as a story. Just as the person who sets the tone, calls the shot, and signs off at the end of the day. And he's one of them. Still in the unit. Still present. Still quiet. I don't think he expected to end up here. Serving under the woman he walked away from in front of 2 families and a chapel full of witnesses. I'm sure that wasn't the path he envisioned when he said I was too much. Too rigid. Too intense. But here we are. He doesn't challenge me. He doesn't push boundaries. He follows the line. And I let him. Because there's no need to redraw it. There's nothing personal left in it. I don't seek him out. But I don't ignore him either. He gets the same treatment as anyone else who performs well, stays within expectations, and doesn't make problems. I don't hold grudges. I hold standards. There was a time I thought he might try again, reach out in some way beyond that one denied meeting. But he hasn't. And I think that's the one wise thing he's done in this entire timeline. He's not a threat. He's not a rival. He's just one more face in formation. And that's all he gets to be. The legacy I've built doesn't trace back to him. It doesn't begin with heartbreak. It begins with what I did next. I used to think the most powerful thing I could do was rise high enough that he'd regret what he gave up. But that's not power. Power is rising so high that his opinion no longer registers. That I can be in the same room, the same command, the same chain of operations, and never once feel the urge to remind him of what he lost. Because I didn't lose anything. I regained myself. And the people I lead now, they don't see a woman who is left. They see someone who never stopped showing up. Someone who keeps the structure intact even when the circumstances aren't perfect. Someone who earned every stripe without making it a spectacle. I've been asked before if I'd ever tell the full story. If I'd ever use it to teach, to mentor, to warn. Maybe. Someday. But it won't be a cautionary tale. It'll be a lesson in restraint. In what it means to rebuild without performance. In how to carry yourself when the person who tried to break you ends up standing silently in the 3rd row, watching you do what they never had the patience to finish. The best comeback doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand recognition. It just shows up. Prepared. Precise. Unshaken. It leads. Thanks for watching. If someone once doubted you or tried to make you feel small, how did you rise from it? Would you ever work alongside them again? Or would you walk the other way? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. And if this story hit close to home, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a reminder. The best kind of power is quiet, earned, and unshakable.